Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and in some of my recent videos, some of you may have noticed these two bus bins just sitting here on the side, waiting for some attention. No stickers, no labels, nothing like that. These are just a couple pre-built bins sitting here for more than a month and a half now, just waiting for something to do. I originally set them up because I was anticipating the harvest of the castings from my oldest system. I usually keep my oldest systems up here on the top shelf, and then as you work your way down, you get to the younger systems. This system here is now, can you imagine it? 35 weeks old. That's 245 days. I have to glance over at my little cheat sheet. I'll show it to you as soon as we get this bin over onto the bench, and we can get to work on it. This is my cheat sheet. It's a little board that I make some notes on once in a while. So like I said, 245 days of age. Most of my systems are long harvested by this time, and I guess that's partially attestable to the extremely long amount of time it's taking to migrate the worms out of their finished compost, which is over on this side of the bin, underneath the flimsy covering of just paper. And then what's under the plastic is the migration zone that I'm trying to lure the worms into. It's the section of the bin that's got fresh bedding, and it's been getting fed regularly, and as you can see over here, over the course of those 52 days, there's been 5 feedings applied to try to keep that movement of the worms going. My goodness. I've been setting out these little piles of diatomaceous earth, the white powder that you see over here on this plastic, and the insects that the stuff has taken care of for me is quite substantial. They were almost like not visible because they're in these little gray puddles, the ones that have already gotten knocked out by this stuff. Oops. And there's still quite a few of them that are moving around, but now they're all covered in this stuff too, so stuff's been doing a good job knocking out the little fruit flies that it encounters, but there's always more where they came from for some reason. So now, my aim today was to break my 12-day period between check-ins. So today, it's been 8 days since we last checked in. And I just figured I was going to try to break out of that that feeling like you need to keep to some sort of a pattern that's evolved over time just because of a recurrence of a certain number of days in between check-ins. I figured, you know what? Today we're going to check in sooner. So I was just curious too, because we had placed in a big huge carrot as the bait for these little guys to come for. And we'd also use some of my new worm chow that you could see sprinkled in over here on top. So there was coffee also. So the stuff that was used out here to try to get them over most recently is on the very far edge, because every time that I come in here to do this, do like a reset of the feeding area, I'll usually nudge everything further in that direction and try to increase the overall space of their new quarters, if you will. I don't know, I'm kind of trying this new thing here where I'm not so driven to complete the migration of the worms and just sort of allowing it to take as much time as it needs. And that also has the side effect of allowing enough time for side effect. But basically, it also permits extra time for any cocoons that might have been left behind within the material to hatch, and for those worms to kind of get moving around and looking for good stuff. And you know, I'm sure there's all kinds of leftovers remaining within this collection of castings for baby worms to feed on. But if they start moving around and wind up in this pile of nice fresh bedding and fresh food, and over here where all the other worms are hanging out and partying, then hopefully they'll be convinced to stay and not leave. So I don't know, I'm a little distracted by some of these flying insects cruising around here, so I just figured I'd take some of that dry stuff that had been, you know, kind of scattered across the top, and we'll try to get it down low so it can, you know, put its dryness to our advantage of possibly sucking up some of the moisture in the materials that are down below the surface. We've been wanting to see this stuff dry, and that's the reason for the relatively flimsy coverings. You know, having only that piece of newspaper on top, you know, it's folded in half. It doesn't allow for, you know, lots and lots of evaporation to occur. So right below it, it might be still a little bit damp, but oh man, it is quite damp. I keep wondering if, maybe I should just switch to having no coverings, 'Cause as long as the stuff stays this damp, I could tell as soon as I started putting my fingers through the stuff that it was still quite moist. Put yourself in the shoes of a worm, Would you want to move out, or would you be completely content just to hang out in that nice moist material? You would think that they'll be just completely satisfied to just stay and hang out, right? Although, let's do just another quick sampling of this material over here. Let's pull some more up. It does seem to me like, maybe we're seeing a little bit fewer worms now. It used to be that we would just start going through this material out here and there'd be worms throughout it, but it is looking like their numbers have dropped in here significantly. And 52 days, that's quite some time. I don't know what this is. It's a rock or a seed or something. Might just end up excluding things like that. They're definitely not finished castings, whatever they are. Alright, so here I'm just, taking advantage of this big hole to submerge some of that dry stuff that was out on the surface. So that's kind of promising. I mean, right out here on the surface, I'm seeing it's a cocoon, a worm cocoon. It's kind of, the color of it is not so bright and light like if it was just placed there. It's got that darker kind of color, suggests that it's already been sitting around here for a week or two, hopefully getting close to that point where it hatches. I mean, I do look around and I see them all over the place. And it's good to see that they're a little bit darker in color, because hopefully that means that their parents have already skedaddled and made their way over into the fresh bedding and the place where all the fresh food is going, and that far fewer new cocoons are being placed into here, so that we can sort of imagine that the last cocoon was already placed in here in the past, and that we're now waiting for some limited amount of time for baby worms to emerge from their cocoons and get big enough so that they'll get moving around and hopefully make their way over into the space where we want them to be. So I'm not going to work on picking out every single worm and moving them over manually, but I do want to definitely get this stuff aerated really quick. Seems like this has been helping, and maybe that was just the missing step here too. It's part of the reason I wanted to get in here earlier than the typical 12-day interval we've been doing between check-ins, because it just seemed like if aerations are a useful thing, then why wait 12 days between doing them, So if coming in here much more frequently to do many more aerations other than, every almost 2 weeks, 12 days, geez. I don't even know why we settled into the 12-day interval, but whatever the reason, this is now an 8-day interval, and certainly no reason to wait if you feel like there might be a reason to come in and do something that might benefit the thing that the bin is currently trying to do. Alright. It's nice to see that this stuff does break apart pretty nicely, but I also, once in a while, feel something in my hands that doesn't feel like it's crumbling readily, so I just can't seem to resist the compulsion to try to break it into small pieces. Yeah, this migration looks like it's making some decent progress, and hopefully this aeration helps it further along, so that someday it might be done. But like I said, I'm not in a rush. I'd rather just allow for the amount of time, whatever amount of time is needed, for the cocoons in this material to all hatch and let those babies make their way over. So I'm treating this as a little different than I usually run systems. A lot of times what's happening in here with the cocoons is already treated as a separate container, which is a cocoon nursery on its own, but it seemed like, why wouldn't it all be able to possibly happen in here at the same time? So it's kind of cool when you look down in here and you find a itsy bitsy little worm. I mean, I can't look at a worm and tell how old it is, but this sucker's puny. So let's put them over where we want the worms to be. All right, yeah, it looks good. Looks good to me that we've got far fewer worms in this material now. Depopulation is finally looking like it's nearing the end. We're not going to stop it now, but it also makes me question whether it's necessary to reinforce the next feeding, if there's going to be a next feeding. I don't know if that, huge carrot that we placed in here recently might still be partially in here as leftovers, although I thought, for a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of orange. There it is. Let's treat the side over here as done, as having been aerated, and we could just let this continue as is with a fairly flimsy cover, newspaper. And over here in the feeding zone, we'll just do a simple little check-in, see how things look. Perhaps we won't even need to change anything. We could just leave it be, let it continue. So yeah, this is definitely where the worms have come over to hang out. They're out here in good numbers. Some of the bedding we've been using lately, but there's not a whole lot of it. Feels to me when I'm looking through this migration zone, a lot of times it seems like it's already, almost all castings in itself too, alongside what's already, thought to be its harvested batch of castings. It's almost like, I don't know, almost seems like by the time I'm ready to start scooping finished castings out of that side, this material here is going to be ready for depopulation and moving the worms over into something else. This might be the beginning of an interesting new trial in terms of how to run bins instead of having things that are so focused on a distinct starting and finishing. Maybe it's possible to run something like this in a more of a continuous kind of fashion. So all right, we're definitely doing a lot more tilling up over here than we've done in the past. I was just really curious about leftover bedding in this stuff. I definitely already noticed in the last check-in how much, rich casting density this stuff already had out here. It wasn't even kind of looking like a baiting area or a migration zone anymore. It was just looking like more of the same as far as the container goes. And these little pieces of cardboard used to just sort of delineate the existing finished castings from the newly established feeding zone that was set up to try to lure them out of the material. So they're not dividing or separating anything by any means. They're just there for us to be able to have a rough idea of where the two zones meet. And it's almost starting to help a lot to have that there, because they're getting harder and harder to tell apart just visually at this point anymore. Alright, I do have more bedding, and I do have a whole fresh batch of worm chow I just made. I'm tempted just to break this thing out, give these guys a little bit more motivation to keep moving out of their finished castings and over into here, and not so much anymore about moving them out, but more about just keeping them content, and this, what's, kind of evolving into their new home, almost like an in-place migration is kind of what, I don't know why, but I kind of think I coined that phrase once upon a time when I did something similar. Treating it as, yeah, we've migrated the worms, but they've not gone anywhere. They're in the same place. So in place, that's where the concept of in-place migration came from for me. So there's no need, I think, to add food, because this carrot they got last time is in here, and for the most part it's uneaten. It's definitely softening up, and it had this piece of paper surrounding it. Makes me wonder if it's not being eaten because of that, or maybe it just needs to soften up further so the worms can actually nibble on it. So, there's worms on it, or maybe even worms burrowing into it. I guess depending on how soft it's gotten in certain places. So, yeah, why don't we, instead of giving them nothing today, what we'll do is we'll treat today's feeding as sort of a dry food worm chow feeding, and it will register in my tracking system as a feeding. But it'll also make me feel like we've given them more bedding, because I think they need it. I don't even know. We might have even, I don't know, did we increase the size? We could have. It does seem like it. So I'm going to go grab my prepared bedding mix that I've got, and we'll cover this thing up, throw some chow in there, maybe even some grit, and then we'll be done. My pre-made bedding is a mix of different shredded papers and cardboards, and there's also leaves mixed in here. And then I dampen the whole thing down and throw some finished worm castings in here too, to give the whole thing a little bit of kind of biology, or a little kickstart in terms of something actually living in there already. Now here you could see, as I mentioned, I've topped off my supply of worm chow, and I had to almost like tamp it down to have the level settle enough so I can get the last of it in here. But I don't know, I guess we'll go pretty generous. Not so much because I intended to, but because it all just kind of came out in a little avalanche style there. I guess we could try to blend it in a little bit with the surrounding paper. Could even throw in a little bit of grit for them in case they need it. I don't know if they need it. Then we can come in with some more of this bedding. It does almost seem like bedding is the main thing they probably need down in here. So let's make sure they've got what they need. And now we've definitely nice and deeply buried that carrot. So hopefully it doesn't I'm not even sure if the carrot is really the reason we're seeing the flying insects in here. It might just be the moisture they're coming for, or who knows what the real reason is. So, alright. Interesting experiment. I'm not even sure if it's... I feel just tempted to get a little bit more. One more handful. I don't know why. Just, you know why? Because it's not level, you know. Once it's level, I'll feel better. Looks kind of cool, right? It's got these layers now. It's like the brand new section, pretty heavily worked, but not even that old section, and the old section, which is virtually depopulated of worms now, which is looking pretty good. And pretty soon we could probably start scooping this stuff, using it out in the garden. I mean, here in my location in central New Jersey, I'm still a few weeks away from the last frost date for my grow zone. So it's too early to be using stuff out in the garden yet, but soon the time will be here when the stuff will come in pretty handy out in the garden. So, do we have everything? We've put in our food, we put in our bait, and oh my goodness, I almost forgot about these little guys. Ugh. This is you can see this whole pile is all dead bugs. So the diatomaceous earth is doing its job, but it's really not getting to the heart of the problem, you know. It's kind of a band-aid. Whatever, let's just leave it as is, I suppose. I might even come in here and sprinkle a little bit more of this stuff out onto the top surface, right around the edges and stuff, so that any other flying insects coming in here, thinking about making a home for themselves, might end up with the same situation as all these other ones that have already gotten caught up over here in this pile. And then as far as covering up over here on the finished casting side, well, this has some diatomaceous earth on it as well. Maybe that'll get some sprinkled on it too, but right now I'm not going to bother with that. That's something I just kind of go around and make sure all my bins have it anyway, so I'll do that at a later time. So we're done. That's it for checking in now on my 245-day-old system. 52 days in progress with this horizontal migration. And I'm not even sure if I'm really treating it much like a migration anymore. But at some point, there will be a harvestable batch of castings. But here I also feel like I'm giving myself plenty of time so that the cocoons can hatch and we'll get those babies, you know, joined in with the rest of the crowd. So, all right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.